So there certainly are scriptures where Jesus talks about decentralization as being a key message. That came up very early on in his ministry. And he met one woman who was a Samaritan, and she said, our people say that we have to worship on this mountain. That's where we worship God. And you people, you Jews, say that you have to worship in Jerusalem. And Jesus said, there's coming a time, and is now here, where you don't have to worship here or there. You worship in spirit and in truth.
So there is a lot of noise, which you can probably hear right now, and we're going to do our best to edit out as much as we can. This is just the joy of a lot of areas in El Salvador at the moment, and as we say, testament to the growth and activity that's happening here. Welcome to another interview with Nikki and James, and today we have our new friend, Eric Cram. I'm going to give a little bit of backstory because it was quite an interesting way that we sort of met and then we developed our relationship. And Eric contacted us asking for information about buying a car in El Salvador. And he wanted to know if our ebook would help him. And so we actually had a video call with Eric to talk about that. And then he also explained that we got into a bit of conversation and he had written a short book. And I was like, that's awesome, I'd love to read it. And then Eric's plans didn't turn out as perhaps he thought they might. And we ended up having lunch together. Or was it breakfast? Oh, breakfast. We ended up having breakfast together at Canigüe, our favorite restaurant.
Yeah.
And from there, some really interesting and deep conversations have evolved, and we really wanted to share them because I have gotten a lot of insights personally from reading Eric's book, and since then he has written more, and I wanted to talk to him about it before he leaves in person to get some ideas on it. So welcome, Eric. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
And it's been great to meet you and read your book.
Oh, great.
And also have the deep conversations, as I mentioned.
Yeah. And I've actually really enjoyed watching you, James, just sort of get into the book and then all of a sudden bringing parts of it into conversation. All of a sudden it's come through, which is really cool to see.
So, yeah, and I'm going to... that is something that I like the ideas so much in the book that I wanted to use them. So I started to test them out in conversations with other people, and Nikki's been listening to me trial them, and I've come back with feedback for Eric as well, and hopefully he's appreciated that.
Yes, I really appreciate how much you guys have been, how supportive you've been, how much you've been available, how genuinely committed you are to the things that you guys profess. And our first kind of interaction was, I think, doing the call. And so I just want to recommend to anybody who's considering reaching out that they definitely should.
Thank you.
That if you're like, book a call, buy the book, do the combo package. It's so worth your resources to do that. It's the best first step I can think of. If you're interested in El Salvador, interested in Bitcoin, and considering moving here, definitely do the package.
Thank you. We didn't ask for a plug.
No, I was going to say, we'd be interviewing you.
Yeah.
So, or talking to you about your story. So, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you. Yeah, we do appreciate that.
Okay.
Can you please give us I guess, is it called the bibliography of your book or the elevator pitch of your book?
Yeah, sure.
Yep.
The idea came about when I was talking to some people in the Christian community about Bitcoin, and I was getting some feedback that they thought, well, maybe this is a bad thing, that there are some prophecies in the Bible about in the end times that there would be a one world currency that would be used for tyrannical purposes, that would be used by a one world government to control people. And so there were quite a few people who thought, well, maybe Bitcoin is that thing and I want to stay away from it. And so just in the course of conversation with them, I found that I was kind of coming up with ways that I was proving quite the opposite. Okay. That Bitcoin actually is far more of a representation of the life and teachings of Jesus than any currency that I've ever heard of or experienced myself. So I decided to write it down into some notes, put it on Amazon for the lowest price that I basically could, which I think was $2.99, and publish it as an unfinished book that had the basic elements that were enough to show people in the religious community that this is the opposite of what they think it is. So what I found was that I was actually able to put something together that showed people of faith that this was actually something far more representational of the life and teachings of Jesus than anything else that I'd ever discovered. And I kind of came up with a question, which was to the Catholic and Christian community: what if you were able to use a currency to buy your daily supplies with, to save with, that was so much like the spiritual truths that are represented in the Bible, that having and spending money was a form of prayer? And so that's where it all started. I wrote the book 2 years ago. I put it down. I wasn't really interested in doing anything with it. That's pretty much what I do with all my books, is I write them, I put them on Amazon, and then I forget about them. I don't market them or anything like that. And it wasn't until I got here that I started really appreciating the potential of what it could be for the community here. If they're committed to adoption, what's the best way to reach people? And having been through a few different movements, and having been part of, when I was younger, a church that was evangelically based and that they wanted to do outreach and reach people of different cultures and different languages, one of the mistakes that was often made was the church would think that as long as we can speak their literal language, we can reach them and either change their minds or convert them or something like that. But what they didn't realize is that there's such a big difference between the American way or the Western way of doing something versus other cultures, that it's not a language barrier in the sense of your actual verbal language. It's a language barrier in the sense of where you're coming from and what place in your own body and in your own being that you speak from. Wow. So I think that one of the big mistakes people make when coming here to evangelize about Bitcoin is thinking, if I can speak the language of Spanish, then I can show people the light. But the language of El Salvador and of Latin America, in a lot of parts of it, isn't necessarily Spanish, it's heart-centered faith. Wow. Spanish is just the literal verbal language used to share the deeper language of a heart-centered faith.
Well, okay, you've said a few things in there which... so it's quite interesting. A lot of people do actually refer to some Bitcoin as having... believing that maybe it is a cult or a religion. And the deeper I sort of go into it, I can see how people will see that. So it's quite interesting, and the longer I've gone into it, the more similarities I've seen of it being like a religion. Mm. And there was something that you said there that I found quite powerful, which I haven't heard you say before, but spending money being a form of prayer. Mm. And that is so how I sort of see the universe. I'm speaking for myself here, but I believe Nikki's probably similar in that our intentions, like it's up to us how we think and the actions we take every day, regardless of, and I guess that is a form of prayer of what we want to see and manifest into the universe, right? Mm-hmm. into the reality. And we do that just, I guess, this is my personal opinion, but to be a good person, we do those actions innately to the best of our abilities. And then it's quite interesting to think about it like faith doing that, and with Bitcoin is a vote and doing that as well. I've waffled there, but hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's something that's still developing in the community, is how Bitcoin plays into the parts of ourselves that are not just strictly intellectual, and what it can be for us, not just what it is in and of itself, but what it can be and what it can represent. And the conclusion I've come to is that in my life there are two poles that are the furthest things apart from each other, but are still on the spectrum of my personal existence. And on one side we have spirituality. Spirituality is the most ethereal, intangible, and unpredictable part of my life. There are results of it, but you don't know when, you don't know how, you don't know the rewards, when they're coming, how long they last. Where then on the other side of it, you've got something which is money, which is the most tangible. Even if it's digital, it's tangible in the sense of you know exactly what you have. It's incredibly quantifiable. It's super predictable, and you know exactly what your rewards are, and you know what you're going to get for it when you exchange it for something.
Yeah.
And those are sort of the two poles in my life. So if I can have those aligned, if both of them represent the deeper truths that I'm aware of, and that the people who have taught these things, the prophets who have taught them, that they've shown, then everything else between those two things I can see, does this align with these things that I so appreciate about spirituality and money, which things like decentralization, things like verification-based system, open source, deflationary, or
So it's I think it's a great place to perhaps for me to dive in there, which is that you've taken some of the key aspects of, for me, I hear Bitcoin words there, but I feel that you've gone and you also hear religious words in there, and you derive meaning from that. One of the things that I found about the connection I built with the book, one of the deeper things that I discovered while we were talking over breakfast, and also once I started reading the book, was that you appeared to have a deeper than surface level understanding of the religion that you were practicing. And I guess Christianity, this is my ignorance coming out here, but I have spoken to a lot of religious people or Christian people who it comes across as a very, I don't mean to sound rude, but a surface level or shallower sort of projection into the world of perhaps what their understanding is. And sometimes you see that with people who are into cryptocurrency, for example, but don't understand Bitcoin. And then once you go down the rabbit hole of understanding more what Bitcoin is, you get this deeper philosophy that starts to develop. And I started to see that deeper philosophy in the conversation we were having about Christianity, or more specifically, Jesus, and the story that was around that. And I found that was what caught my attention. And when you started telling me about some of those things that you just spoke about, like the decentralization and time preference and proof of work, and you started going down this deep spiritual rabbit hole around those things, I was like, wow, this guy's speaking my language, but he's speaking it from a religious perspective instead of my technical Bitcoin perspective, but they're almost identical. That's how I started to feel.
Okay. Yeah, I started realizing that the language was different, but that the fundamentals were the same.
Right.
And I don't really define myself as being a Christian. I figure when Christians can figure out what that word means, then I'll decide if I'm one of them.
Okay.
And that's kind of how I feel about most movements and most banners is everybody's got their own view of what it takes to be in that camp.
Right.
And so I think one of the reasons that it's possible one of the reasons why my view is different from other people is that I had a commitment probably a little over 20 years ago where I was going to do what was necessary to try to follow Jesus as opposed to study him, and that was going to take place outside of the church.
Right.
And so I've had some really interesting experiences that may have helped me develop a little bit of a different mindset.
For me, when we were having a discussion, you had raised the money changes table in the book. And a lot of people have heard very much that Jesus came in and flipped the money table because he was angry at the moneylenders. And that's sort of the beginning and the end of that. But you gave me perspective on that, which I hadn't heard before. And that gave me a deeper understanding of perhaps what Jesus was trying to do and connected him more to the Bitcoin movement. Do you mind elaborating on that a little bit for our listeners? Because I don't want to.
Yeah.
I mean, I could steal it and share it, but I would like to hear it from you if you don't mind.
I think the point that I was trying to make was that it doesn't apply very well.
Oh, really?
But if you tell me what you heard,
okay,
then I can see if I don't remember my book right.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I was missing context with the money table and the flip.
Uh-huh.
I thought the flippening. So I believed Jesus was angry at the money exchanges for profiting upon making a money exchange. But what I heard from you was, and I interpreted, was that the money changers were busy taking money to, and also exchanging, to absolve people from their sins. And what Jesus was angry about was that people didn't have to pay these people to absolve them from their sins. They didn't have to make a sacrifice on their behalf. What Jesus wanted people to realize was that they could worship God within themselves. And he was trying to wake up the people and be angry at the money changers, but wake up the people that they didn't need to pay the money changers to ask God for forgiveness. They could ask for God for forgiveness inside themselves. And the conclusion that I drew was like, oh wow, that's like Bitcoin, because I can hold my money inside myself. I don't need a bank. I don't need the exchanges. I don't need that centralized power structure. And all of a sudden what I saw was, instead of Jesus working for the church, which was my ignorant perspective because I've never really studied it, all of a sudden I saw this dude that was walking around trying to decentralize the church and teach the people that he had that they could worship God within themselves, or had God within themselves, and they could worship him anywhere at any time. And I'm like, that's Bitcoin. I can put the money inside myself and I can have my Bitcoin anywhere at any time. I no longer need the centralized power structure. So that was the deep insight and narrative change of Jesus for me that really got me interested into wanting to read this book and know more about the deeper philosophy that you were having on your experiences in life with faith, I guess.
Yeah, what he said after was it before or after? But he said, a place that's meant to be a house of worship, you've turned into a den of thieves.
Right.
And there are some different theories on what he was most upset about, but the money changers were apparently exchanging or charging outrageous fees for the sacrifices necessary to absolve people of their sins. So if people would travel there, they couldn't travel with their sacrifices sometimes, but they would travel with enough money to buy the sacrifices. So you did have a middleman issue going on there. You had the money changers apparently overcharging to absolve people of their sins.
To offer convenience. They're charging a premium for convenience.
Yeah.
Right.
And there are certainly a lot of other scriptures where Jesus talks about decentralization, where he met the woman and she said, you seem to be a prophet. Can you tell us, our people believe that we have to worship on this mountain, and your people say, that...
The mountain story is really good. I like that one.
Okay.
Yeah. It's a good visual.
So there certainly are scriptures where Jesus talks about decentralization as being a key message that came up very early on in his ministry. And he met one woman who was a Samaritan, and she said, our people say that we have to worship on this mountain. That's where we worship God. And you people, you Jews, say that you have to worship in Jerusalem. And Jesus said, there's coming a time, and is now here, where you don't have to worship here or there. You worship in spirit and in truth. And it's hard for people to appreciate, really, how much of an impact or how heretical or how much of a challenge that would be to national security when you would say something like that in that time and place.
Yeah.
That was a place that had somewhat of a theocracy.
Yeah.
And when you start saying that suddenly this mountain has no value any longer, and Jerusalem, in the context that you're thinking of it, is you don't need that anymore either. And so whoever controls them doesn't control you. You can do it anywhere, you can do it anytime. Suddenly you're turning something that started out as an economy of scarcity, and you're turning it into an economy of abundance.
Wow.
And you're removing the power structure from people that recently had it. You're removing the power structure from people that previously had it. And you're going to get in trouble when you talk about things like that. Wow. So decentralization was one of the most disruptive things that he did. And as a Bitcoiner, I think people can appreciate that. And even though my book is really geared toward showing Christians how much Bitcoin is like Jesus, in the end, there's going to be a lot of Bitcoiners who go, oh, Jesus is so much like Bitcoin.
I've got chills, like right now, just hearing that, because I'm sitting there and I'm just like, wow, this guy, like, I hear the things that you say and I'm like, it's true today, to say things bad against banks or the institutions or separating nation and state. People are like, why would you say that? We can't do that, it's wrong, all sorts of things. And Bitcoin is busy giving people that power to decentralize and decouple those things. And saying some of those things is controversial right now. And it's powerful. And it removes the power structures. It's amazing. So I'm listening to that story and I'm resonating and applying it to what we're doing and what we're seeing in time now.
Yeah. Yeah, and it gives us an opportunity, too, to kind of look back and see what mistakes were made in the process, too. How people took some of these concepts and then turned them into something that kind of was missing the point. So we're in that place right now in the Bitcoin community, too.
Yep.
We have certain core fundamental ideas, but people are veering this way and that way because maybe they haven't had the experiences of going through a movement before and understanding just the natural things that humans do when they receive new information, when they're onto something new, how they form it into their image instead of forming into its image. Or, like Max Kaiser says, you don't change Bitcoin, Bitcoin changes you.
Yeah.
Well, we sure try like hell to change Bitcoin now. And we try to make it what we want it to be.
Yep.
So there's so many good lessons that can be learned from movements of the past, and that includes the early church.
Yes.
Watching the way that the disciples of Jesus made mistakes and thought he was saying this thing, but was actually it was a little bit different than that. And then touching on what you said, which I find really interesting. One of my favorite parts of truth is the way that when you just offer a little bit of it, how much it illuminates how much corruption and darkness has been taking place this whole time.
Yeah.
We've been living under this idea that this is normal, whatever this is. And then all of a sudden, somebody shows up and says, here's an alternative. Just an alternative, right? Free market alternative, not forcing you, not converting you by the sword, just saying, why don't you try this if you want to? And all of a sudden, the system absolutely panics. And that is a very good sign that you have a corrupt system that is centralized and that has been hiding in the darkness for a long time.
Wow. I love it. I love this so much. Like, Nikki knows, like, so many conversations now, I actually talk about bits and pieces that I've taken out of your book. And I'm just going to circle back a little bit. It's like saying that people have the power to practice anywhere. Like, it takes away that power structure. Anybody can download a free open source wallet onto a phone or a computer today with an internet connection and receive value. They don't have to ask for permission from anybody, and they can receive value, and they can be part of this movement. And I relate that back to faith, and same thing. Right now, people can go inside and they can be grateful and they can worship whatever they want to worship. And that power is massive when you realize that it's yours and that you can take it at any time. And one of my favorite things I run around telling people as well is you have two votes in life. It is your time and what you do with it, and then it's your money, because it's how you store your time value. And those are the most powerful votes that you have control over at the end of the day. And it's all of this is, so in my mind, and I feel the energy now, for me it's very empowering. And I want to share that with people. Like, I want people to feel empowered as well. And that's why I wanted to have this conversation, because I hope that it comes across that these insights might help others to feel empowered.
Yeah.
And I guess that's what Jesus was doing, right? He was like, hey, you can empower yourself right now. You just got to know these simple things. Was it simple but not easy? And that's kind of what it is, right?
Yeah.
Wow.
There's definitely a difference between simplicity and ease.
Yeah.
And I've experienced that many times in my life, where it's like, all you have to do is let go. It's like, yeah, it's easier said than done, but you're right, it's very simple. And there's a lot of letting go that has to take place for us to step into the freedom that's waiting for us, somewhere between spirituality and money, every place in between, on both poles and everywhere in between.
You mentioned that you you wrote the book a couple of years ago. You put it down, and you've since arrived in El Salvador.
Yeah.
And your 90 pages, was it about 90 pages?
It was about 30.
Oh, 30 pages,
Yeah.
sorry.
Yeah,
30
the
pages
initial
has
one.
now gone to 120 pages.
Yep.
Since you've been
Yeah.
here, you've been here 3 weeks?
I've only been working on the book for probably
yeah.
2 or 3 weeks,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
I picked
It's
it
amazing.
back up.
So what inspired you to carry on writing? What was the contact or the person you talked to, or
Yeah.
the feeling that you got to start talking again, writing again?
I realized that people might read it. Before it was just, I'm just going to stick it out there and whatever. But then as I started talking to people and they said, I want to buy your book. And I would sell them copies, like PDFs, because I only have PDFs. I would sell them copies, and then I started thinking, even for $3, I just want to offer something of a little bit more value than this. And then I started also realizing, wait a minute, there's some things I wrote in the past that actually perfectly fit into here. And so there are chapters in the book that I didn't give you yet that are very much poetry, prose, anthems, things that nobody's ever put in a Bitcoin book as far as I know, because it's very vulnerable, soulful, personal development type of experiences that I went through. But there are things that anybody who's on the journey, and that journey requiring some level of courage, is going to be experiencing. And so I started adding more pieces, I started adding more chapters, I started realizing that, wait a minute, I didn't really realize the open source part of this. I didn't really realize the immutability part. I didn't really realize the unconfiscatable part of it. But every time I hear a concept or I'm reminded of a Bitcoin concept, I'm like, wait, that's the same thing.
Yep.
And so I keep coming back to it. One of the things I'm most excited about right now is probably the deflationary nature of Jesus and Bitcoin. And just how fundamentally different it is to work for something that immediately begins to degrade versus working for something that immediately begins to earn you more of what you've already worked for. The snowball effect, the freedom that is available to us when we move from being a leaky vessel that is constantly losing what we're working for, to being a vessel that as you fill it, it actually starts to overflow on its own. You don't have to do anything. Once you get a little bit, it starts building up on its own. Like, that's an entire paradigm shift in how we engage with the world, how we engage with spirituality. When we start to realize that this is something that is being offered to us, it's shocking that there's something that Jesus said when he met the woman at the well. He asked her, he said, would you give me a drink? And because she had a bucket and he didn't, and so she could get down into the well. But he was talking to somebody that his people had no business talking to. That was like an untouchable class to the Israelites of the day. And so she made a point of that and said, hey, like, why are you talking to me when your people have nothing to do with my people? And he skipped that. He's like, I'm not going to deal with that question. I'm going to offer you something else. And he said, if you knew who it was that was talking to you, you would be asking me for a drink of water. Because what I'm offering is a drink that will quench your thirst eternally and begin to overflow within you so that other people could drink from you as a vessel as well. And that's something that we are looking for and finding in Bitcoin as well.
Yeah.
It's not just about, hey, I got some of this stuff. Great. It's, I have an appreciating asset that I can use to actually nourish the people around me, to create community, to become, in a sense, like a financial version of the kingdom of God on earth. Like, I'm empowered to make a positive difference instead of constantly trying to patch the leakiness of my financial condition because I've invested in trash money.
Boom.
If the mic wasn't sitting down, we could drop it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that. I love that so much. and that's something that I mentioned to you while I was reading the book. I really appreciated and enjoyed that you'd snipped passages out, because I read them with fresh eyes, and I was now applying. I mean, not like that sounds like I've read the Bible, which I haven't. But instead of looking at it from a certain perspective, I was changing my perspective now and looking at it and reading it with totally different, like looking at Jesus and basically going, this dude's a disruptor, and he's trying to decentralize the world, and he's a rebel, and what he's doing is, and you mentioned this just before, and I wanted to mention it. It's courageous. It was courageous in the day, and what Bitcoiners are doing today, I believe, is courageous, and it takes a lot to put the time in, and then to talk to people about it and share it and do it in a way that you can actually, without sounding crazy, show people that you can bring more value to their life if they do talk to you, if they do stop and ask those questions and have a conversation, which is kind of what was happening at the well there, where if he didn't engage in the class system but started to talk about the value that they could give each other, their lives would change forever.
Yeah. Yep. The point that you're making about courage is important, because Bitcoin has ebbs and flows. It has bull markets and bear markets. And what's interesting, and I didn't put this chapter in the book, and I think I'll add it, is that there were many times when people were following Jesus and things were happening. Like, he's multiplying the food, and it's all good, and he's teaching the messages, and here comes the crowd. Here comes the crowd. The crowd is so thick that you can't even get in. There's places that he went that people found out he was there. There's an example of one situation where the house was so packed and the door was so packed that this guy needed healing. So his friends actually went up on the roof and pulled back all of the roofing and lowered him in, because there was no way to get him in the door. This is the crowd effect, when people's egos are being satiated by an experience that is taking place. But there were times when he would disappear for a while, and there were times he would go away, and there were mornings when he was like not available, and people would start to panic. Wait a minute, have we been abandoned? Like, have we been betrayed? Because they didn't have a long enough relationship to realize that he's always coming back to continue what he started, and more than that. And that's something I wrote a couple chapters in the book. One's called Bear Market Spirituality. Because
I love it.
I also want Bitcoiners to know that, look, there's going to be ebbs and flows. And there's going to be moments, like right now, there are a lot of people feel like, I've been betrayed. This was a horrible idea. Because there's not enough history there for people to really understand that the fundamentals aren't going to let this die. It's too aligned with what needs to happen and with what people need for this to die. But there will be ebbs and flows. And that's why these things both take courage. Spirituality takes courage. Like financial, like innovation takes courage. And once again, it seems to be the doorway to getting to where we want to go. Yeah.
Wow, that was awesome. Like I love like, and for anybody who's watching, and I it's hard to express. I don't even know what to say about it. Like the new connection that I feel with Jesus' story, and we actually met. So we met a couple that came here, and we had dinner with them, Liam and Mel, and they have also talked about the spiritual journey. And one of the things that he's not the first person to mention this to me, but it's most recent, which was that this is divine intervention. Bitcoin is like a divine intervention in the world, because perhaps things have gone down what you said, like that dark route, and then it's gone so dark that it now actually makes something so positive really shine, and it's really obvious.
Yeah.
And seeing that this like being able to give a comparative example through history is super powerful, and then be able to say, I'm pretty sure we're living through that right now.
Yeah.
And it's hard because you can say that to people about like, oh, computers, oh, the internet, oh, phones, oh, email, whatever, and be like, remember when you thought computers were a dumb idea and now they're in everybody's pockets?
Yeah.
Like, this is one of those moments in time and history, and it's quite hard for some people to see it or acknowledge it or live into it or believe it. And I think this is quite a powerful one. And then to see that there's, and I guess perhaps what you were talking about was being able to, I'm going to come back a little bit.
Sure.
Our mission is adoption. And you've given me another level of communication for adoption that I'm so grateful to have now. I think that's the best way to put it.
I'm glad to hear it, because that's what I want to do. The thing about being in El Salvador is that you have, no matter what you think about government, here it's on your side if your goal is Bitcoin adoption. And so if you have great ideas, there's ways to get it to people who can consider those great ideas, who are not actively working against you. They actually want to participate. You're aligned, at least within that regard. And the church here, and in most places in Latin America and in the Americas in general, I would say, the church already has an infrastructure in place. The highway systems of communication are already there. All you have to do is plug in a message that reaches people on a heart and a faith level, that is authentic, that is inspiring, and why can't it reach everybody in the matter of a month? Like, it's the infrastructure's there.
Yep.
And so I'm really hoping that somebody gets a hold of this and realizes the value of what's going on here. This is more than speaking the language of Spanish. This is reaching somebody at that heart place where they go, wow, this isn't just about sound money. Because let's be honest, a lot of the people in El Salvador, just like in the rest of the world, they don't have a savings, right? So what do they care if it's a deflationary or an inflationary currency? It's gone the minute they get it anyway. So things like that, or talking about the Federal Reserve or money used for wars, they're like, I hear you, and but also I have other issues that I'm dealing with that are a little bit more pressing. And I feel like this is something that is so fundamentally different from anything that is being shared. And it's so easy to catch somebody with, if you're talking to somebody and you want them to receive Bitcoin here, and they say, I don't do Bitcoin. You're like, Bitcoin is a financial reflection of the teachings of Jesus. It's like, wait a minute. First, maybe I'm offended, but also go on.
I'm curious.
Yes. And then you just drop decentralization as the first thing if you want to. Disruption. And if you know the list of the 15 points that I've made, it's all there, and the scripture's there to back it up. Keep in mind that it doesn't matter if you want Bitcoin adoption to take place in your community or in your country, it doesn't matter what you think about Jesus. It only matters what the people you're talking to think about Jesus. You don't have to believe that he ever existed. You don't have to, none of it to you can be true. It doesn't matter. But if you want to reach people where they're at, it matters to them.
Yeah.
So speak their language. And even if it doesn't matter, let's say there's Bitcoiners who say, well, I don't even think there was ever such a person, and this whole thing was an elaborate scheme that was created to control people. First of all, horrible way to control people. Like, you don't want a Jesus if you want to control people. Stick with the religions that were already in place. Centralized, just much better. Don't send in this archetype of decentralization and freedom to control people. But second, if you just look at the principles, that it shares, that the story, let's just say, shares with Bitcoin, it'll change your life. It'll change your life.
Wow. I love it. I really do.
I was going to, and we can cut and move this in here, but would you be interested, or would you like to, is there a chapter in your book and the Jesus connection, because we haven't actually even announced Jesus connection.
No, we didn't even mention the name at the start. I realised that a few minutes ago. That's
And
okay.
in the Jesus connection, is there a chapter you would like to share that you think would be,
Yeah, I don't necessarily think we have to share what the name of it is.
No,
Because
okay.
I'm thinking that the story is quite good, that people might stick around to be like, what's the name of the book?
Eric, is there a chapter that you'd like to share with our audience,
Mm-hmm.
or people watching here, that, especially I suppose the Bitcoiners, that you feel is going to actually, you feel is going to resonate with them?
Yeah, there's something that I think people would say, all right, I see some of these similarities, but there's a lot that aren't going to fit into what you're saying, like blockchain. I have a blockchain chapter. One of the first things that we learn about Jesus is his genealogy, and that there is a unbroken chain of patriarchs that existed before him, that went all the way back to Adam and to certain men of the Old Testament. And the reason that was important at the time, that you get the genealogy from his mom's side, you get the genealogy from his dad's side, is because there were verifications that were necessary. This is another chapter, trust versus verification. Jesus was far more verification based than trust based. I help you redefine what the word faith actually means, because it doesn't mean what we think it does. But there are verifications that were necessary in order to qualify him for being authentic.
Mm-hmm.
And those verifications were, he had to be connected to Abraham, to Isaac, to Jacob, which that's a three-man chain right there of grandfather, father, and son. He had to be connected. He had to be born through the lineage of a person named Jesse, who was the father of a person named David. He had to come through David. Couldn't just be from Jesse to one of his other sons. Had to be through David. Because these prophecies were foretold that the Messiah would come through this chain of men. And so there was a man chain authentication, if you want to call it that. Because when we look forward from the beginning, we see a family tree. But when we look back from an individual up their father's line, we see a chain. And so that is one example of how that authentication that takes place in Bitcoin, of being an unbroken chain of blocks, of having a perfect history of every place that the Bitcoin has been, is exemplified also in the life of Jesus. But it was a man chain instead of a blockchain. Wow. And then there are also other elements that are a little bit more spiritual and ethereal that show that what Jesus was offering us was an opportunity to run the full node ourselves, so that we could authenticate everything that came across our path as either being true or false, without the need of any external sources. So it's, and I'm not reaching for straws.
No.
People might think they hear this like, no, come on. Like, I'm telling you, it's in there.
Yeah.
You're going to see it. You're going to see it.
So are people going to have to read the book to get that? Is that what's happening?
Well, I mean, that's it in a nutshell, but sure, pick it up. Because you're gonna want to see some of the scriptural references, and I'd be happy to debate anybody about these things. I don't even know if it's debatable. I don't know if there's anybody who's of, let's say, the Christian or Catholic faith who would disagree with any of these things once they see it from that perspective.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, it's quite interesting, because I think a lot of Bitcoiners also feel that way about Bitcoin, is once you've put the time in to start researching it, there's no debate. Like once, and that's because that's what people say, right? Like once you've invested those hours, how can you not?
Mm-hmm.
And that'd be quite interesting if anybody is that a challenge that you're putting out?
Sure.
Sure, I might respond to that.
Yeah. Oh wow. Okay. Thank you. This has been a great conversation, and I mean I could just keep going, but I think it's getting late, and we're gonna have dinner together, and I really want to leave it here. I'm looking forward to reading the book now, or am I waiting? Am I waiting for more information?
It's ready.
It's ready?
It's ready.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
I will send you that tonight.
all right. So by the time we get this out, the updated version maybe on Amazon?
It will be.
Okay.
It is now.
Excellent. Oh, okay.
It is now.
Before we go,
Yep.
now you did mention, I think, at one point that you left chapters where you only put like sentences in it,
Mhm.
and so for people to able to write their version, is that right, or just to?
Yeah, there was the original version
Yeah.
had some notes at the end that people could pick up and
Yeah.
move forward with.
But
And I sort of condensed those, filled some of that information
Yeah.
out so that it's not as fragmented
Mhm.
as it was. But once anyone who reads this who has a history, a knowledge of both of these subjects, I think they might start wanting to go, hey, what about this concept? You
Yeah.
didn't mention this one, you didn't want to mention this one, or you didn't mention this one. And this could become volumes
Yeah.
of information, and people could be writing this possibly from their perspective of Buddhist teachings, of Hindu teachings. I don't really know, because even though I've dabbled in those, I don't have the history to know if there's a way to reach those cultures
Yeah.
by saying, look, like this is what the Buddha was talking about in a spiritual perspective.
yeah,
Wow, I'd love to, like, if anybody's into those other belief structures or religions and can relate to that and actually start applying Bitcoin to that, I'd love to hear about that.
Yeah.
That'd be really interesting to see if it's a common thread where there's somebody who's busy trying to decentralize and empower people. That'd be really cool.
Yeah.
Man, it's powerful.
Yep.
Alrighty. If people would like to, is there anything you would like to share with our audience on where they can find the book, how they can contact you?
Sure. Twitter, if you
Okay.
type in my name, Eric Cram, it'll be there. My handle, is it called the handle?
A handle, yeah.
Is that what it's called? Into the Awesome.
Okay.
And then I have 7 books I think I have 6 books on Amazon.
Oh, okay.
So if you type in my name in Amazon, Eric Cram, it might be below Eric Cream and Eric Crumb, but you'll find me. And
Okay.
I think I have 6 books on there right now. One is not published on there.
Okay.
Yeah.
We'll put the links in the description down below, so anybody who's watching and wants to find those books, there'll be Amazon links in there, and we'll also put the Twitter profile in there, which would be
Great.
excellent.
yes.
Great.
All right. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
No, thanks.
Yeah,
Thanks.
we've really enjoyed not just this afternoon, but getting to know you over, I'm not sure how many weeks you've been hanging around here in El Salvador, but we seem to bump into each other a number of times. Always had a great conversation. We've enjoyed building a relationship with you, and we appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks. I appreciate it too. And you guys have been definitely one of the brightest chapters of my experience here.
Thank
So I
you.
really appreciate how sincere and welcoming you guys have been. So thank you.
You're more than welcome, and anybody who can bring light to adoption,
Yeah,
we love talking to them because
important.
it's important.
Great.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Very much.
All right.
Thanks, Eric.